Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I never thought I'd have to fight for my own garage, but when a power-hungry HOA president and his nosy sidekick decided my property was their new parking spot, things got ugly, fast. Lies, threats, and sabotage. They tried it all, but they underestimated one thing. I don't back down. Let the war begin. I never imagined that one day I'd have to fight over my own garage. But life has a way of throwing absurd situations at you, and in my case, it came wrapped in a tailored suit and an overinflated ego named Richard Collins. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished changing the oil on my '68 Mustang when I heard the distinct sound of leather dress shoes clicking against my driveway. Looking up, I saw Richard Collins, the newly elected HOA president, marching toward me with the confidence of a man who had never been told no in his life. He was in his mid-50s with a stiff posture, a permanently disapproving frown, and an expensive watch that he probably checked more than his reflection. Right behind him, like a loyal hunting dog, was Karen, my ever-nosy neighbor. Her arms were crossed, lips pursed so tightly that I wondered if she had ever smiled in her life. Together, they radiated the unmistakable aura of people who were about to demand something unreasonable. "Jason," Richard began, stopping just short of my garage. "We need to talk about your garage situation." I raised an eyebrow, wiping my hands on a rag. "My garage situation?" "Yes, it's come to our attention that your property has the most convenient exit in the entire neighborhood. Unlike the other garages, which require multiple turns to get in and out, yours has a straight driveway leading directly to the main road." I blinked. "And?" Richard smiled, the kind of smile that usually came before someone tried to sell you a timeshare. "That makes it a prime location for community use, so we've decided that it would be beneficial for the neighborhood if you agreed to share your garage space with the HOA, specifically with me." For a moment, I thought I misheard him. I let the words sink in, then looked at Karen, waiting for her to burst out laughing and say this was some sort of joke. But Karen never laughed, and her self-satisfied smirk told me she fully endorsed this insanity. I let out a slow breath. "You want me to give up my private garage so you can park your car in it?" Richard's smile didn't falter. "Not give up. Contribute. It's for the betterment of the community. You have 3 spots in there. Surely you don't need them all. And with my new BMW arriving next week, I simply don't have the proper accommodations for it." I stared at him, waiting for some sign that he was joking. He wasn't. "Let me get this straight," I said, tossing my rag aside. "You want me to just hand over my garage, in my home, on my property, because you can't fit another overpriced car in your driveway?" Richard sighed, shaking his head as if I were a child who just couldn't understand adult matters. "This isn't just about me, Jason. It's about the community. Your refusal to cooperate makes you look unneighborly." "Oh, how terrible," I deadpanned. "I guess I'll just have to live with myself." Karen scoffed. "You don't even use the garage properly. It's full of old car parts and junk. It's an eyesore to the rest of us." That was it. I took a step forward, and for the first time, Richard's smug confidence faltered. "Listen closely," I said, my voice low and steady. "This garage is mine. I paid for it, I maintain it, and I sure as hell won't be handing over the keys to a bunch of overreaching control freaks." Richard pursed his lips, but before he could reply, I pointed at the sidewalk. "Now, kindly get the hell off my property." Karen gasped, like I had just kicked a puppy. Richard, however, kept his composure. "Jason, I strongly suggest you reconsider. I'd hate for this to become difficult." "Oh, by all means, make it difficult," I said with a grin. "I love a good fight." Richard exhaled sharply, clearly not used to people standing up to him. "Very well," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "If that's the way you want it." Karen huffed and turned on her heel, whispering something to Richard as they left my driveway. I watched them go, shaking my head. That night, as I sipped a beer on my porch, I spotted an HOA envelope sticking out of my mailbox. With a sigh, I walked over and pulled it out. The letter was neatly typed, stamped with their official seal. "Dear Mr. Miller, it has come to our attention that you have refused to comply with HOA community requests. Please note that non-cooperation may result in further action being taken against your property. We strongly encourage you to reconsider your stance." I let out a short laugh. They really thought I was going to roll over. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a car honking outside my house. Groggily, I made my way to the window and looked out, only to see Karen standing in my driveway, arms folded, tapping her foot impatiently. Behind her, a black sedan was parked directly in front of my garage, blocking my driveway. I groaned. It was too early for this. Throwing on a hoodie, I made my way outside. "Karen, what the hell are you doing?" She gave me a saccharine smile. "Oh, good morning, Jason. Just making sure everyone in the neighborhood can, easily get around. Unlike some people, I actually care about the flow of traffic." I squinted at her. That's a funny way of saying, I'm harassing my neighbor. Karen ignored me. "By the way, Richard was deeply disappointed in how you treated him yesterday. We were really hoping you'd be more cooperative." "I'll send him a sympathy card," I said dryly. "Now move your car." She let out an exaggerated sigh. "I would, but you see, I can't. I'm waiting for my official HOA approval to park elsewhere." She tilted her head. "We wouldn't want me to break any rules, would we?" That's when I noticed something else. Someone had dumped trash bags in my yard. I exhaled through my nose, keeping my voice steady. "Tell me, Karen, would you happen to know anything about the garbage that just magically appeared on my property overnight?" She gasped in mock shock. "Oh my, it must be those raccoons. You really should keep your yard cleaner, Jason. It's no wonder the HOA is concerned." I clenched my jaw. She wanted me to lose my temper. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. "Fine," I said, walking back toward my house. "Don't move your car, but I'd hate to see what happens if a tow truck just so happened to roll by." Karen's smirk dropped. "You wouldn't." "Watch me." I pulled out my phone and dialed the local towing service. Her eyes widened. "Wait, Jason, let's not—" The moment she heard me say, "Yes, I need an illegally parked vehicle removed," she practically sprinted to her car, fumbling with her keys. She peeled out of my driveway just as I ended the call. First battle, Jason. 1, HOA 0. The next couple of days, pure harassment. First, a letter from the HOA claimed my front lawn wasn't up to community standards despite being perfectly manicured. A $200 fine was attached. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. Then I got another notice. Someone filed a noise complaint against me. For what? I had no idea. I rarely played loud music, and I sure as hell wasn't throwing parties. Later, when I was out running errands, I came home to find my trash cans missing. Seriously? They stole my damn garbage cans. I was pissed, but I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly where this was going. Richard and Karen were trying to wear me down to make my life miserable until I cracked and gave in. But they underestimated one thing. I'm not the type to back down. So, I fought back. 1. I installed security cameras, high resolution, motion activated, and covering every inch of my property. 2. I reported every fake HOA fine to the city council along with documentation proving that my home was not under their jurisdiction. 3. I filed a formal complaint against Karen and Richard for harassment, and then, just for fun, I went online and blasted HOA on social media. The local news picked it up. Apparently, I wasn't the only one dealing with overreaching HOA tactics. Within hours, the comment section was flooded with horror stories from other homeowners. That must have rattled Richard because the very next day, he tried a new tactic. I was outside washing my car when Richard showed up again, this time with a clipboard. "Jason," he said smoothly, as if the past few days of psychological warfare hadn't happened, "I wanted to give you one last chance to reconsider." "Reconsider what?" I asked. "Letting you park your car in my garage, joining your little dictator club?" He sighed dramatically, flipping a page on his clipboard. "I'm afraid if you don't comply, we'll have to take legal action." I snorted. "Legal action for what?" "Owning my own house." Richard smirked. "You'd be surprised what the law allows." Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I narrowed my eyes. "Richard, I'm going to say this once. Get off my property." His smirk didn't fade. "You're making a mistake, Jason." "No, you're making a mistake," I shot back. "And when this blows up in your face, don't say I didn't warn you." Richard gave me one last look before turning on his heel and walking away. I didn't know it at the time, but he wasn't bluffing. The next time I saw Richard, my garage would be locked, my things would be gone, and his car would be inside. The moment Richard walked off my property, I knew one thing for certain. He wasn't finished. He was the kind of guy who wasn't used to losing, and the fact that I had laughed in his face only made him more determined to win. The problem was, I wasn't the kind of guy who lost either. If he wanted to play dirty, fine. I'd make sure he regretted it. The first thing I did was double down on security. I upgraded my cameras, setting them to notify me instantly if anyone so much as breathed near my property. I even put up motion-activated floodlights just to make sure Karen and Richard knew that every time they tried sneaking around, they'd be caught on tape looking like deer in headlights. Then, I went after their biggest weapon, bullshit HOA fines. The next morning, I drove straight to the city zoning office with every single fine and complaint they'd sent me. It took exactly 5 minutes for the guy at the counter to tell me that my property was not legally under the HOA's control. I already knew that, but hearing it from a city official, that was gold. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I filed an official complaint against the HOA for harassment and sent copies of my zoning documents directly to their office. Then I made sure Richard got a personal copy taped to his front door. By noon, my phone rang. It was Richard. "Jason," he said, his voice all business. "I saw the documents you left me. That was unnecessary." "No, Richard," I said, grinning as I leaned back in my chair. "What's unnecessary is you trying to fine me for garbage that you and Karen probably threw on my lawn." There was a pause. Then, in a tone so forced it almost sounded painful, Richard said, "Perhaps we can resolve this like adults." I laughed. "Oh, you mean like when you parked Karen's car in front of my driveway? Or when you stole my trash cans? Or when you filed fake complaints against me?" Silence. "Yeah," I continued, "I think we're past the let's talk this out phase." I hung up before he could respond. That night, I sat on my porch, watching as HOA board members shuffled in and out of Richard's house. My little stunt had pissed them off, and I knew they were plotting something. Good. Let them. Because no matter what they tried next, I was ready for them. I woke up to the sound of metal clanking. Groggy and half-conscious, I glanced at the clock, 2:47 a.m. Then I heard it again. A metallic screech, followed by a soft thud. Something was wrong. I shot out of bed, grabbing my phone as I hurried toward the window. Outside, under the dim glow of the streetlights, I could just barely make out figures moving near my garage. Number freaking way. My phone buzzed with motion detection alerts. I opened the security app, and there it was. Richard and 2 other guys breaking into my garage. They weren't even trying to be subtle. Richard, dressed in his usual expensive button-up, had a crowbar in his hand. His lackeys, one of them looked like a local handyman, the other a guy I recognized from the HOA board, were hauling out my belongings. I watched, frozen in disbelief, as they dragged my toolboxes, shelves, and car parts onto my driveway like trash. Then a set of headlights beamed into view. A sleek, brand-new BMW rolled up, engine purring like a pampered house cat. And I understood. They were stealing my garage. Not just breaking in, Richard was literally emptying it out so he could park his damn car inside. My blood boiled. Without thinking, I stormed outside, barefoot, wearing nothing but sweatpants and a t-shirt. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I roared, startling them. Richard, to his credit, barely flinched. He turned, giving me that same smug grin that made me want to punch him into next week. "Ah, Jason," he said, as if we were discussing the weather. "I see you're awake. Listen, since you refused to be reasonable, I figured—" I didn't let him finish. I charged toward him, grabbing him by the collar before slamming him against the side of my garage. "You broke into my property," I snarled. Richard struggled, trying to pry himself free. "Jason, this is for the community. The community can kiss my—" Suddenly, Karen's shrill voice cut through the night. "He's attacking him. I'm recording everything." I turned just in time to see Karen standing on her porch, phone held high. And that's when things got weird. Richard, still trying to squirm out of my grip, took advantage of my distraction and shoved me backward. But the dumbass miscalculated his own strength, because instead of freeing himself, he stumbled straight into the fence. And then, his belt caught on one of the wooden posts. For a second, time seemed to freeze. Richard flailed, his feet dangling a few inches off the ground, his pants slowly ripping down the middle. Karen gasped, "Oh my God, Richard, ripe!" His designer slacks split clean in half, exposing his bright red silk boxers. The 2 HOA lackeys stood in stunned silence. One of them started laughing. I couldn't help it. I started laughing too. Richard, still hanging off my fence, twisted in humiliation. "So stop recording," he shrieked at Karen, but she was too busy filming. The cherry on top, my next-door neighbor, an old retired Marine named Frank, had just stepped outside, drawn by the commotion. He took one look at Richard and let out a wheezing cackle. "This is the funniest damn thing I've seen in years," he wheezed. I was still chuckling when I heard the police sirens. I turned back to Richard, who was still struggling like a fish on a hook. "Hope you got a good lawyer," I said with a grin. "You're gonna need it." The courtroom was packed. HOA board members, nosy neighbors, even a few local reporters had shown up, eager to see how this circus would end. At the defense table sat Richard Collins, looking significantly less smug than usual. His hair was neatly combed, his tie was perfectly straight, but there was a nervous twitch in his jaw. He knew he was screwed. I, on the other hand, sat comfortably beside my lawyer, Ethan Parker, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who had taken one look at my case and practically licked his lips. "Jason, this is the easiest win I've had all year," he had told me before we walked in, "but let's have some fun with it, shall we?" I had no objections. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, called the room to order. "We're here today regarding unlawful trespassing, property damage, and theft committed by the defendant, Richard Collins, against the plaintiff, Jason Miller." Richard visibly swallowed. Karen sat in the front row, gripping her purse like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. She was here to testify, against me, of course, but I had a feeling she had no idea what was coming. The HOA's lawyer, some generic guy in a cheap suit, stood up and launched into a weak defense. "Your Honor, this is all just a misunderstanding. Mr. Collins acted in the best interests of the community. Mr. Miller refused to follow HOA recommendations, and Mr. Collins—" The judge held up a hand. "Let me stop you right there. Mr. Miller's property is not under HOA jurisdiction. I have the zoning records right here." She tapped a stack of papers. "So why was Mr. Collins attempting to enforce HOA rules on a property that doesn't belong to the association?" Silence. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The lawyer stammered, flipping through his notes. "It was a request, a community request." The judge raised an eyebrow. "A request that involved breaking into a locked garage in the middle of the night, stealing personal property, and changing the locks." Richard turned pale. I grinned. This was too easy. Then came the fun part. Ethan stood up, looking like a predator about to pounce. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "before we go any further, I'd like to submit some evidence." He nodded toward the bailiff, who wheeled in a TV screen. Oh yeah, it was showtime. The screen flickered to life, showing clear security footage of Richard and his goons breaking into my garage, hauling out my belongings, and parking his damn BMW inside. Richard sank lower and lower in his seat. Karen looked horrified. Then the footage cut to the best part. Richard dangling from my fence, his pants ripping in half, his bright red boxers on full display. A collective snicker ran through the courtroom. Even the judge hid a smile. Richard slammed a fist on the table. "That video is irrelevant." Ethan leaned forward. "Oh, I think it's very relevant. It proves not only the trespassing, but also that Mr. Collins was caught in the act. And if I may add, his physical reaction to getting caught suggests that he knew what he was doing was illegal." "Objection!" Richard's lawyer was practically sweating. "Overruled," the judge said, barely suppressing a smirk. Then Karen took the stand. She tried to sell the story that I was the aggressor, that Richard was just trying to help the community, but the second Ethan played the unedited footage of our fight, it was game over. Karen sputtered, trying to talk her way around it, but she had nothing. Then came the final blow. Richard, in a last-ditch effort to save himself, stood up mid-trial and pointed at Karen. "It was her idea," he shouted. Karen's jaw dropped. "She was the one who kept pushing me. She told me we had to make an example out of Miller. I didn't want to go through with it, but she kept saying we had to teach him a lesson." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Karen looked like she was about to strangle him. "You spineless coward," she shrieked. "Don't you dare blame me for your—" "Order!" The judge banged her gavel. Richard was spiraling. I was just trying to maintain order in the community," he stammered. We can't just have people doing whatever they want. If people like Miller refuse to comply, then what's next? Chaos? Anarchy?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. Sounds like you wanted to be a dictator, not a community leader. The judge sighed, rubbing her temples. I think we've heard enough. She slammed her gavel down. Richard Collins, I find you guilty of trespassing, property damage, and harassment. You are ordered to pay restitution to Mr. Miller for all damages, cover his legal fees, and you are hereby barred from holding any position within the HOA. Richard slumped in his chair, completely defeated. Karen sat frozen, her reputation in shambles. And me? I just sat back, enjoying the sweet, sweet taste of victory. I wasn't the type to gloat. Okay, maybe just a little. Richard was finished. The court ruling not only cost him a massive payout in damages and legal fees, but it also stripped him of his precious HOA presidency. To top it off, his reputation in the neighborhood was now lower than a used car salesman at a lemon lot. But I wasn't done yet, because after everything he put me through, I wanted to make sure he never forgot this lesson. A few days after the trial, I made a call to a painter. I had one simple request: turn my garage into the most obnoxious eyesore possible. And, oh, did they deliver. By the time they were done, my once sleek and simple garage was now a blinding neon pink monstrosity, decorated with glittery golden swirls and gigantic bold letters that read, Nestor's private property, HOA presidents not welcome. Oh, and I didn't stop there. To really drive the point home, I installed a custom sign right next to it. Official Richard Collins Memorial Garage, in honor of his stupidity. I even added a little plaque with the date of the infamous pants incident. The neighborhood lost its mind. People came by just to take pictures. Some neighbors laughed so hard they cried. Even the mailman gave me a thumbs up when he saw it. And Richard. Oh, Richard was livid. He showed up one morning, red-faced and shaking, demanding that I take that monstrosity down immediately. I just smiled. Sorry, Richard. HOA has no jurisdiction here, remember? He stormed off, muttering something about lawsuits, but we both knew he had no case. A week later, the for sale sign appeared in his front yard. By the end of the month, Richard Collins was gone. And me. I still have my garage, I still have my house, and every time I pull into my neon pink garage, I smile, because victory is sweet. But revenge? Revenge is neon pink and covered in glitter. It had been a few weeks since Richard's humiliating departure, and life in the neighborhood had never been better. The HOA, now under new, much less psychotic leadership, had backed off completely. No more fines, no more fake complaints, just peace and quiet, exactly how I liked it. One evening, as I sat on my porch sipping a well-earned beer, Frank, my retired Marine neighbor, strolled over. He leaned on the railing, staring at my glorious neon pink garage. You know, Miller, he said, scratching his chin, this is the single greatest thing I've ever seen. I grinned. Thanks, Frank. It's my personal masterpiece. Frank chuckled. I actually saw Richard the day he left. Poor bastard was muttering to himself, shaking his fists at the garage. I think he called it a personal attack on his soul. I nearly choked on my drink from laughter. Good, that means it's working. Frank sat down next to me, cracking open his own beer. So, what now? You finally gonna repaint that thing? I looked at my garage, the blazing pink, the golden swirls, the giant, official Richard Collins Memorial Garage sign. And then, as if on cue, a family of tourists pulled up in a minivan. The driver rolled down his window. Excuse me, are you the guy with the famous HOA feud? We saw it online. Frank wheezed with laughter. Oh, hell, you've become a landmark, Miller. The guy's wife leaned over. Would you mind if we took a picture in front of your garage? I took a long sip of my beer, considering. Then I smirked. Knock yourselves out. As the family cheerfully posed in front of the Richard Collins Memorial Garage, I leaned back in my chair, feeling nothing but pure satisfaction. Richard was gone. HOA was put in its place. And me? I had become a local legend.